NFL schedule release week. And the news that we broke this morning is the first Monday Night Football game of this season, Troy, will feature two AFC West powerhouses with quarterback questions, at least as far as health is concerned. Bo Nix, Patrick Mahomes, Broncos, and Chiefs. It's a pretty good opener for Monday Night Football.
Yeah, it's a great opener. I mean, you make a good point as far as these quarterbacks coming off of serious injuries. I think everyone's wondering whether or not Patrick Mahomes obviously is going to be back for that one. A down year last year for that franchise. I expect them to come back and be the team that we've seen for much of the last decade. And then, of course, with Denver, you could argue that they were a quarterback injury away from making it to the Super Bowl. It's unfortunate for that organization, but what a great job Sean Payton has done. So to kick that off week one in a divisional game, I always liked that as a player when you opened up against a divisional opponent and kind of helped set the tone in what is a very competitive division.
And what is a huge year for us, obviously, our Super Bowl season. It will culminate with you and Joe calling Super Bowl 61 in Los Angeles. So the way we're going to break this thing up is we're going to do the NFC. I have questions on some of the big NFC teams. Then we'll take a quick break and we'll do the AFC. So let's start with the Cowboys, your longtime team. They made a lot of defensive acquisitions during this offseason, which obviously was necessary. I guess the big question is, do we think their defense will be better enough or enough better that they can finally get back to where they haven't been since you were there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that is the big question. They can only get better. I do, and it's early, I understand that, but I do like the hire of Christian Parker. I think sometimes you bring in a young assistant who now is getting his opportunity after having coached under some really good people over the course of his career. He comes in with a good resume. All indications are that the players are excited about it. I think what they've done, starting with the draft to address some of those needs on the defense, has been positive. What I think, Greeny, gets lost a little bit, the offense was so prolific last year, and then you've got a healthy Dak Prescott. And unfortunately for them, we saw it with Joe Burrow and the Bengals a couple of years ago. When you have that kind of play at the quarterback position, typically that means good things when the season comes to an end. And yet for Dallas, they failed to even make the postseason. Can that offense continue to play at the level that they did last year? And that's a big if. It was one of Dak Prescott's best years. It was George Pickens' career year. It was Javonte Williams' career year. I mean, there was a lot that happened on the offensive side of the ball. The numbers may not look as good. In fact, I think if you're a Cowboys fan, you hope the offensive numbers don't look as good, because that would then mean that the defense is better and playing a much bigger role in the success of that team.
Yeah, and you mentioned Pickens. The way that seems to be working out, and we haven't really heard from him yet.
Right.
But the way it appears, he signed the franchise tag. It looks like he's going to play and give it a prove-it year. And so, look, if that defense, the way I look at it, and I've made the same comparison to the Joe Burrow Bengals, if they can just become average on defense, they could be dangerous.
Well, there's no question. And I do think, as it relates to George Pickens,
yeah,
he comes in, he knows he's in a contract year, he puts up a huge year, and I know that all players would feel this way. They would then expect to be rewarded for that. And it's a letdown then when you get the franchise tag. So I would have to believe that George is less than thrilled about that he wanted a long-term contract. That also, Stephen Jones comes out and says that they are not going to sign him to a long-term contract. So what does that do for his frame of mind as far as him going into this season? Time will tell. But if he can go out and have the year that he had last year, along with CD, and keep him healthier than what he was, they won't need a lot out of that defense. And I would expect that for those that are optimistic and feel like you said, hey, if they're just average, I would believe that this is a defense that at minimum would be average.
You know what just jumped into my head as you were talking, because I was thinking, I always remember when John Elway retired and he was thanking players and he mentioned Shannon Sharpe and he said, I know you're open, I know you're open, I know you're... Like, receivers are always open. When you're the quarterback, and in this case, he's got like two studs. Let's say Pickens is there and playing well. And you got CD. And both of them, I have to imagine, you're sitting on the sideline and they're both, one's in one ear and one's in the other saying, I'm wide open, I'm wide open. What's that like as a quarterback?
Well, I only had one. That was Michael Irvin.
Right.
Michael was the only one who was lobbying for the ball.
Yeah.
But I think that Dak handles it really well. If you're, and him being a veteran guy, and I think also his leadership skills comes out in those situations, because all receivers, they do want the ball. The running backs want the ball. And as a quarterback, especially when you're as prolific as what they were last year, there's a lot of conversation. But I think Dak manages that exceptionally well. And also a credit to CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. I felt that last year they were on the same page from day one. And there was always a question, I think, when they came in and when they picked up Pickens as to what was that dynamic going to be between those two. Was CeeDee going to be upset that maybe you've got another number one receiver in many people's eyes coming in, and yet those two, by all accounts, worked well together. And then, of course, the play on the field spoke for itself. So I think it was a good setup, and Dak, again, he's been a facilitator, and he's done a great job of it.
Let's talk about their arch rivals, and that's the Eagles. And we were just talking briefly before we came on the air. Well, I first started covering the league right when your team was in its ascendancy. And what I remember very specifically was your relationship with Norv Turner, who was your offensive coordinator. How many years roughly were you together?
He was there 3.
At the very beginning of your career, and really was there for your development before he got a head coaching job, and how important that was for you. And I bring that up as the sort of the context for the Jalen Hurts conversation. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. He is going to have his 7th different primary play caller in his 7 NFL seasons. Can you explain, because there's so much like microscopic criticism of him at times, how much of a factor you think that is and what that would be like for a quarterback?
Well, it's big. I mean, I think if you look at Brett Favre or, Aaron's a little different. Aaron Rodgers, he went through a change of offense when Matt LaFleur came in, but Peyton Manning ran the same offense. Tom Brady pretty much throughout his entire career ran the same offense. I was not one of those. I had the same offense with Norv and Ernie Zampese for 7 years, and it makes a huge difference. And I know I've had those conversations with Jalen Hurts, 7 in the NFL offensive coordinators, but he also had a number of offensive coordinators in college.
That's right.
So you go back to high school, it's rare when he's had the same play caller for back-to-back years. A few years back when they won the Super Bowl, Shane Steichen, and what he meant to Jalen Hurts and that offense, and they did some good things. They hit a bump in the road. Kellen Moore comes in. There's been a lot of consistency, although not at coordinator, there has been within what they're doing offensively. And I think that on the one hand is smart because they're playing to the strengths of Jalen Hurts. And he's a quarterback who likes 2x2 set receivers and guys coming off the ball vertically, a lot of throws outside the numbers. And I think that with where they're going this year, that it will look different. And I think that there'll be more asked of Jalen Hurts to work the middle of the field, to maybe line up under center a little bit more in the play action game. And that's an offense that I'm a big believer in. When you look around the league at the offenses that are really having success, the San Franciscos, the Dallases, the Green Bays, those type teams, tying it in much like it was in the 90s. It seems to be swinging back in that direction. And I believe Jalen can do anything that he's asked to do. I go back to early in his career. We had them in the playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was Jalen's first year as a starter.
I remember the game.
They did not play well in that game offensively. They really struggled, and they needed to be better throwing the football. And the very next year, it was remarkable, the turnaround that we saw from that passing game and from Jalen Hurts. So what that proved to me is that he's a quarterback who puts in the time to do everything he can to be his best. And so whatever he's been challenged with this offseason, I fully expect him to come out and play the kind of football that we're accustomed to seeing him play.
We'll see if the A.J. Brown, the long expected A.J. Brown trade winds up taking place. I mean, that obviously will change the dynamic to some
I thought
degree.
that would have happened. I honestly did. I thought it would have happened around the draft.
I think there's a June 2nd, the designated. There's some significance to the beginning of June financially.
Yeah, it just feels, I don't know what you've been saying on the show every morning, but it feels like there's going to be something there that changes, and they went out and kind of addressed that in the draft as well. So, but I've got way too much respect for the Philadelphia Eagles and that organization and Howie Roseman and the job that they do, Nick Sirianni. I just think it's a good group. I think they're resilient. I think they adjust very well. They'll be in the thick of things just like they have been for many years.
They had a great draft, I thought, actually. Let's do one more NFC team. We'll stay in the division, and we'll talk about the Giants. I happened to run into John Harbaugh over the weekend, and he seems very, very excited and optimistic. Sometimes after a really long time for a guy like him, getting a new chance, new opportunity, sort of new life, young team. I thought they had a very good draft. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about that quarterback.
Yeah.
What did you see from him in his first year?
Well,
What do you think?
I like him a lot. I go back. I have a little bit of a history with Jackson. I tried recruiting him to UCLA.
Okay.
And in fact, I've lost a few quarterbacks that I've tried to recruit to UCLA that have gone elsewhere. He signed with USC and then, of course, Ole Miss. So I've been following him. Comes from a wonderful family, competitor. I think he's the right kind of guy. He's wired the right way to be playing in New York. If I'm him, I would have to be awfully excited to have a guy like John Harbaugh, who has done such a great job as a head coach in this league. Yeah, there's no question that the Giants will be better. And how long will that take? I don't know. But just like for players to go to a new team and kind of get to hit the reset button, the same holds true for coaches. And I could see where John would be excited about the opportunity to be coaching one of the real flagship stations of the NFL.
Yeah, here's the only thing that would concern me about Jackson Dart, and that is I remember I covered Jim McMahon when he was in Chicago, and when he was healthy, he was spectacular.
Right.
People don't realize just how good McMahon was.
Right.
The problem is he was always hurt, because they used to say he has a linebacker's mentality,
Yeah.
and they said it at the time like that was a good thing. And it turns out maybe it wasn't such a good thing. So if he were to come to you now and say, hey, Troy, all these hits I'm taking, everyone's telling me I need to be more careful. Like, what would you say to him?
Well, we had that talk. We were covering them in a game against the New England Patriots in December after he had come off a couple of his injuries, the head injuries. It was well documented and shown. And we had that discussion about him protecting himself. And within the first 5 plays, he just got absolutely blown up on the sidelines. He didn't get out of bounds. So that is, and I was told some of those things. When you're young, when you get into the league, you do have this mindset. And that's like Jim McMahon, I think that's part of what makes him him. I think it's the same for Baker Mayfield. Some of that bravado and toughness is how a lot of these quarterbacks are wired and how they gain their edge. And I think that's Jackson. He doesn't want to get away from that, but I would have to believe that John Harbaugh has already had conversations with him about that, because everyone knows. I mean, you can't lose your quarterback, so you can't put yourself in harm's way like that. But I would say that my guess is the offensive linemen, the defensive players, all those guys in that locker room have enormous respect for Jackson Dart and the way in which he plays and the way in which he sacrifices his body. So you got to try to find a balance, and you never quite do, because nobody really talks about it as long as you keep getting up. It's when you don't get up that then they point to the fact that you're taking maybe unnecessary